Hello, Awesome Soul here, and we have a brand new weapon coming to the game. Although, no, not exactly a new weapon, a smaller version of an existing weapon. And that would be a mini lock-on missile launcher. The LOML Stinger is an epic variant of the legendary-sized weapon. Now, interestingly enough, this does actually have a separate tag. Whereas the main one is the lock-on missile launcher, this is the lock-on missile launcher Stinger. So what we are most likely going to see, along with this update, is the lock-on missile launcher getting a additional name, much like how the flak cannon was once the smaller version of that was introduced. So I figured what we could do here is take a look at the stats that we have available at the moment, and compare them to the lock-on missile launcher itself. Now keep in mind, these are the stats we have currently. These might change and be tweaked a little further down the road just because it's not out yet. The update, I mean. They're probably still doing some balance tests and tweaking some things. So, starting things off, let's take a look at the health. When it comes to the health per CPU, they are pretty much the same, although, funnily enough, unless I typed it in wrong, the LOML Stinger is slightly higher. And I mean slightly, like a fraction of a percentage higher. So really, they're pretty much the same. And rather fittingly, that brings us to CPU. The large missile launcher has 275 CPU load, while the smaller one has 140. Now, obviously, this is not half because you can't really do half unless you want to end up with 0.5 of a CPU, but there hasn't really been a precedent for 0.5 CPU, so highly doubt we'll ever see that. Or at least, maybe, I don't know, they were talking about that with cubes, possibly, but I doubt they'll do that. Anyways, off topic entirely, but this means if you want to have the full fire rate potential, you're actually going to be costing yourself slightly more CPU if you use the Stingers. But rather obviously, the trade-off here is the much smaller hitbox, and the redundancy, which is always a very powerful thing in Robocraft. The damage per hit is exactly the same, which is exactly what they did with the flak, and also what they did with the shredder, or I guess the splitter. The mass of this part is also slightly higher of the other one, much like how the CPU is. But I guess that also makes sense, because the CPU is higher, so it wouldn't quite be half the weight. Now, here is something very interesting, and I don't believe we've seen this before on any of the other size variants. One of the main defining factors in, I guess, the balance of this weapon is that it is less energy efficient. Yes, you heard right. It is going to be using more power for the Stinger than you would be using if you used the large lock-on missile launcher. How this is going to play into its viability, we don't fully know yet, but I have a strange feeling that we might not actually see too many people using the Stinger, just because it is costing you around 100 extra power just to fire another rocket, which over time it definitely would add up if you wanted to fire off a full volley. So yeah, I don't know, are the other trade-offs good enough to warrant the less power efficient weapon? But anyways, going on to the fire rate, as to be expected, since this has a nominal count of 4 guns as opposed to the original 2, you're going to have a much lower single gun fire rate. However, it does have exactly the same fire rate at max count, which can't be said about some of the other weapons. So I guess that's not such a bad thing. It keeps the exact same fire rate, it's just less efficient at firing. Or as far as power goes, anyway. So I don't know if that's going to be a better thing or a worse thing than what we're used to, as far as the normal way they go about doing these smaller variants. So that pretty much does it for all the stats, but I will say, for those who are new to the game, because this will be in the epic category, it does also mean that it's going to be cheaper to forge. So if you wanted to try out the lock-on missile launcher but didn't quite have the funds, well, this could possibly be your chance. There is one more thing I would like to cover in this video, and that is the proposed weapon changes that Mark has been throwing around. Now, like I said in the other videos that I've covered this in, this is not planned. They're not working on this at the moment. This is something that Mark just had an idea of, and he wants to gauge the community's feedback on it. So, with that out of the way, we'll quickly get the gist of this thing. If you would like to read it, link is in the description down below. It's fairly quick, but I will just summarize it for you. So, Mark has a problem with the fact that you can't really have the big, beefy tank gun looking weapons on a tank. Right now, if you're wanting to build a max CPU bot, aka 2000 CPU, you're pretty much limiting yourself to the super low tier weapons. He says here, if you want to put big beefy guns on a massive tank, forget it. You haven't got enough power for that. So please use 20 twiddly little lasers instead. If you want to play with a massive chain shredder, please put them on something super tiny, aka a small CPU bot. This feels like the wrong way around. Surely it makes more sense to have small weapons featured on a small bot, and vice versa. Another weird thing is the high power consumption weapons actually have high CPU, which therefore lowers the power on your robot, which is very counterintuitive, Mark feels. And yeah, that part makes a lot of sense. Cause, you know, you're building your bot, and say you've got like 1000 CPU for your frame, and then you strap on 2 chain shredders, and that's 325 CPU right there. So you're adding on 650 CPU just for 2 weapons. It's pretty damn ridiculous. And obviously, your frame, only being 1000 CPU, won't be super tanky. So you've kind of got a huge amount of firepower, but now you've got a lot less power to work with just because you wanted to strap on the weapons you like. It is a bit weird if you think about it. So some of the proposed changes he wants are to kind of flip things around, but not exactly. So he was thinking, perhaps the large weapons could be tweaked so they require less power, but have a small reduction in damage per second, in order to maintain the overall time to kill. The small weapons, on the other hand, are changed to deliver greater DPS than the large weapons, but at a higher power cost per second, aka less power efficient. Much like we saw with the mini missile launcher. The other thing that he gets into is that under this proposed system, large bots will look large because they have the large weapons, and then small bots will be able to maintain a much smaller profile, and you can actually tell that they are smaller, low CPU bots. Whereas right now, like I said, you've got a 1000-ish, maybe 800-ish CPU frame, and then you've got these massive weapons that are pretty much the majority of your bot's CPU. And also the size, usually. Now, the last sort of thing he gets into here that's kind of important that I will go over is that he feels under the new system that he's proposing, the weapon mechanics for the lock-on missile launcher and rail might not work with just a simple power adjustment. So he doesn't quite know, but of course, if the community likes this, they will then send it out in the Brawl variant. The Brawl game modes that change every once in a while, providing brand new rules for you to try out. Sometimes they're super crazy changes, other times they're just smaller tweaks. So like I said, link is in the description for that. Go check that out, and you can actually type your comment in there because it is a forum post. So make sure you type your comment on the forums so Mark can see it, and then also, if you feel like it, type it in my comment section down below. I would also like to read it as well. And obviously, I would like to hear what you have to say on the mini lock-on missile launcher as well. With that, guys, I of course have been the Awesome Soul. I thank you so very much for watching, and I will see you next time. Take care.